Hello and welcome to the Essex Boys Murder Case Part 31. Before watching this video, I recommend watching Part 4 onwards on YouTube first, as these videos are all about the key individuals and the murder victims' movements on the day of the 6th of December 1995. A quick mention to the Facebook page called The Real Essex Boys Murder Club. If you're interested, please feel free to join, as there's some great people on there with a lot of knowledge on this subject. So you may have noticed from the last few videos I have decided to stay at the White House Farm track, and I have not moved on from 7:05 PM. If you've been following these Day of the Murder videos, you're probably used to me moving from location to location on that day. All the places Tucker Tate and Rolf visited that day. Mick Steele, Jack Williams and Darren Nichols movements that day, and all the other key individuals who were involved with both parties that day. With me reaching 7:05 PM, and I am at the murder scene at the moment, I've decided to stay at this part and cram in as many videos as I can before I move on with Mick Steele, Jack Williams and Darren Nichols to their next location. So what I'll do is I'll give you a quick catch up on where I got up to with the previous videos. Darren Nichols has received the call from Jack Williams to come and pick them up. He drives to the lay-by and parks at the entrance. Jack Williams gets into the back of the Passat, covered in splatters of blood. Moments later, Mick Steele gets into the front passenger seat, and as I said, the time is approximately 7:05 PM. So was Darren Nichols more involved in these murders? I've mentioned a few times in these videos that if the hit went down like Darren Nichols says it did, then he was more involved in my opinion. Having read his statements and gone through his police interviews, so many things just don't add up. It's like he's giving his first police interview at the beginning and distancing himself from what really happened that night. Then when he gets assurances, he will not be charged with the murders. He works with the police to fit his statement in with the evidence they have gathered, like the phone logs and witness statements, to build a case based on circumstantial evidence. And he's going to be the cherry on the cake. He's going to be their star witness in the murder trial. So moving on with this video, if you've not read Nipper Ellis's book, Last Man Standing, I do recommend it, as it gives you a different view on the whole Essex Boys saga. Now in Nipper Ellis's book, he mentions a rift between Darren Nichols and Ian Spindler. If you don't know who Ian Spindler is, he was basically Pat Tate's gopher, and they had spent time in prison together. When they both got out, they stayed in touch, and he did a lot of Pat Tate's running about for him, and he became his gopher. Now, when Pat Tate was shot by Nipper Ellis, he was taken to Basildon Hospital. At a visiting time on the ward, Pat Tate's gopher, Ian Spindler, turned up. Shortly afterwards, Darren Nichols turned up on the ward to see Pat Tate. Now, with Darren Nichols and Ian Spindler not liking each other, a difference of opinion took place between the two. As Pat Tate picked up on the hostility between Darren Nichols and Ian Spindler, he goaded Darren Nichols into going outside with Ian Spindler to sort their differences out, saying, "If you are a proper man, Darren, you will have it out with him now." Now, Darren Nichols refused to go outside, so Pat Tate belittled and humiliated Darren Nichols at his bedside. With the ill feeling between Darren Nichols and Ian Spindler, did he put it to Mick Steele and Jack Williams that he wanted Ian Spindler in the Range Rover that night? Was he the fourth man that was supposed to be in the Range Rover that night? there were circulated rumours that a fourth man was meant to be in the Range Rover at the track that night. Now, different people have claimed to be the fourth person who was supposed to be in the Range Rover that night, Carlton Leach being one of them. Was Ian Spindler supposed to be the fourth man in the Range Rover that night? Tony Tucker had his girlfriend in the Range Rover doing the driving. Did Darren Nichols try and orchestrate to Mick Steele and Jack Wilms that he wanted Ian Spindler in the Range Rover that night, and he would hold a shotgun to join in with the executions? Now, Darren Nichols had a deep hatred for Ian Spindler, so there's motive for him to get rid of his arch nemesis once and for all. I mean, Darren Nichols knew Mick Steele and Jack Wilms would take care of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, but he wanted Ian Spindler there too. He wanted to take him out himself. If Ian Spindler was supposed to be in the Range Rover that night, then he is one lucky man, as he would have been executed too. Do you know what? When I've been doing these videos, I've definitely come across a mention of Sarah Saunders phoning Mick Steele and telling him that she had heard that Ian Spindler should have been in the Range Rover that night. God, I'm sure I've read it on the court transcript somewhere. God, I can't think where. But did Ian Spindler tell Sarah Saunders he was supposed to be in the Range Rover that night, but for whatever reason he couldn't make it? If this was true, Darren Nichols, he would have been seething with anger that his enemy was not in the Range Rover that night. I mean, just talking about Darren Nichols and Ian Spindler in this video, and how these two did not like each other, but were both connected to the Essex Boys, I think it just goes to show you how much Darren Nichols was involved. I mean, after the dud cannabis fiasco, Pat Tate was putting a lot of pressure on Mick Steele and Darren Nichols. And Pat Tate was asking Mick Steele for Darren Nichols' phone number and address. Mick Steele said he would not pass it on, but did tell Pat he would try and sort everything out. Darren Nichols, hearing what Pat Tate was prepared to do to him, did he put the word about in the criminal fraternity that he wanted to buy a gun? One of Darren Nichols' associates, Roy French, was asked by Darren Nichols if he could get hold of a gun for him. I mean, Roy French claims that Nichols said to him, "I don't mind what the weapon is, so long as it's reliable and holds plenty of rounds." Roy French had criminal connections in the South East London area, and after making inquiries concerning Darren Nichols' request for a firearm, he got back to him and said he could get him almost any type of weapon he wanted. To his surprise, Darren Nichols told Roy French to forget about their conversation because he had already sorted things out himself. Now, just going back to what I said earlier in this video about Darren Nichols' first police interviews, and he's trying to distance himself from what really happened that night, what I will talk about next is exactly that. In one of Darren Nichols' earlier police interviews, he says an associate of his had a gun for shooting rabbits, and Mick Steele had asked Darren Nichols to ask him if he had any for sale or he knew anyone he could buy one off. Now, at this moment throughout his police interview, Darren Nichols never tells them his name is Roy French. He just calls him a friend who shoots rabbits and more of an acquaintance than a friend. Darren Nichols does not want them talking to Roy French, so he doesn't give out his name. Darren Nichols said this associate of his got back to him and said he could not get a gun for him, and that was the end of it. Now, this was a week or so before the triple murders. As the police were doing their inquiries and building a case against Mick Steele and Jack Wilms, they had Darren Nichols in police custody trying to get as much information from him as they could, but he still was trying to distance himself from any actual involvement in the murders. As the police are doing their investigating and trying to build a case, Roy French came forward and told detectives on the case that Darren Nichols had approached him for a gun and said he didn't mind what weapon it was as long as it was reliable and held plenty of rounds. This must have been a nightmare for Darren Nichols, as he's tried to distance himself from the murders, saying Mick Steele had asked him if he knew anyone who could get hold of a gun for him. Darren Nichols, in the police interview, never gave the name of the person, and here is Roy French coming forward, giving his version of events, saying it was Darren Nichols who wanted to buy a gun off him. There's no mention that Darren Nichols wanted to buy a gun for someone else, like Mick Steele. I mean, think about it. Darren Nichols tells the police in an early interview that he asked an associate about buying a gun on behalf of Mick Steele, and his associate got back to him saying he could not get hold of a gun for him. Now we have Roy French, the associate, saying he told Darren Nichols he could in fact get hold of a gun. In fact, any gun he wanted. But Darren Nichols told him he no longer needed one. Why did Darren Nichols change his mind about getting a gun? Roy French has nothing to gain by lying to the police about this. Darren Nichols has been involved in a triple murder. He doesn't want to implicate himself in these murders. Now he's helping the police with their inquiries. Now he's going to be a supergrass and their star witness in the trial of the Essex Boys. I will be talking about Roy French in a later video, as he was spoken to by the police at another date, and he becomes a confidential witness for the prosecution. Just like Darren Nichols' gopher, Colin Bridge, who was arrested and interviewed about the 10 kilos of cannabis he was caught with in Darren Nichols' transit van, along with Darren Nichols himself, who was in another vehicle in front of him. Darren Nichols decides to do a deal, naming Mick Steele and Jack Wilms as the Rettendon Range Rover murderers. Before he does this, Darren Nichols wants his gopher, Colin Bridge, released without charge, and he became a principal witness for the prosecution. It's almost if the police are using hostile witnesses who could in fact help the defence team of Mick Steele and Jack Wilms. I mean, after doing their police interviews, they made police statements, thus turning them into witnesses for the prosecution, albeit being confidential and principal witnesses. This goes to the belief that the police helped Darren Nichols with his second statement. They have phone log evidence, so they can alter times that Darren Nichols said previously to fit in with his new statement, and they have a potential witness or potential witnesses for the defence. So they make them do police statements, and they become witnesses for the prosecution if they're needed. So like I said, I will be talking about Roy French and what he said about the gun Darren Nichols was wanting in a later video. So, going back to Darren Nichols, why did he change his mind about buying a gun? Who was this gun really for? Did Darren Nichols want it for himself and he was going to take part in the executions? Was he going to shoot Ian Spindler and get rid of him once and for all? Why did he choose not to buy this gun? Had Mick Steele and Jack Wooms already acquired guns? Was the gun Darren Nichols was trying to get to buy from Roy French for himself, but his bottle went when Mick Steele contacted him with the actual day the triple murders would take place? He knew Mick Steele and Jack Wooms would be going through with the killings, so he devised a plan that he would be the getaway driver now. We know these murders were premeditated. If Darren Nichols knew nothing about the upcoming murders, why did he not ask Mick Steele what he wanted a gun for? A conversation must have taken place why Mick Steele wanted a gun. I mean, Darren Nichols, he never mentions this in his statements or police interviews. Why? Because he knew the triple murders were going to take place as planned. He had just turned from a shooter to a getaway driver. So if it came on top and he was arrested along with the others, he could just turn supergrass. I mean, there's a shotgun found at an address, and Darren Nichols knew of this address, which was Mick Steele's address. There's an independent witness who says Darren Nichols was also after any type of firearm, just as long as it was reliable and fired plenty of rounds. This evidence and witness statement to me makes Darren Nichols more involved than he's made out in his statements. This is not some petty crook being a sparky through the day and selling the odd bag of weed in the evening like he's made out. I mean, he's teamed up with Mick Steele and Jack Wooms, who are major drug importers. I mean, not just Mick Steele, but Jack Wooms also. He was as much involved with drug importation as Mick Steele. I mean, Steele had the connections in Holland and brought the drugs in a boat, and Jack Wooms knew where the drop-off point would be, make sure the coast was clear, and he would pick them up and take them to a chosen location. Now, Darren Nichols is within this inner circle. He's moved up the criminal ladder. I think the police have played a blinder here as they have turned Colin Bridge and Roy French from defence witnesses into confidential and principal witnesses for the prosecution. I mean, that's really clever. I mean, it would have been really interesting if the prosecution did put Colin Bridge and Roy French on the stand due to their statements, and the defence would have been able to examine them both. But there was no way the prosecution would have used these two at the trial. Absolutely no way. They would not take this chance at the trial. The defence, they could have cross-examined Colin Bridge on how he evaded prosecution after being caught red-handed with the 10 kilos of cannabis resin. What deal Darren Nichols pulled to get him off this charge? I mean, I just never know. How much he knew about Dave Trunley and DC Bird and the chauffeuring Darren Nichols did for them at the clay pigeon shoots or any other shoots. Yeah, they could have cross-examined Colin Bridge on his police interview when he said to stay away from Dave Trunley and his associates after heavy drinking sessions, as they were likely to blow your head off. Colin Bridge knew Dave Trunley owned shotguns. The defence could have asked of his association of Darren Nichols and how he became his general gopher and suicide jockey. What he and Darren Nichols got up to on the day before the murders and what they got up to on the day of the murders. The defence could have cross-examined him thoroughly and proved to the jury what Darren Nichols was like. I mean, he worked with him, he drank in the pubs with him, and he was his general gopher, / suicide jockey, as we all know. He knew him very, very well. The defence would have proven to the jury that Darren Nichols lied partly in his second statement. I mean, let's not forget, Darren Nichols, as he said in court, is a self-confessed liar. There's no way the prosecution would have allowed Colin Bridge to be a witness for them in the trial. The defence would have picked holes in his testimony all day long. The cross-examination of Roy French about the gun Darren Nichols was trying to purchase. Who was the gun for, and did Darren Nichols ever say to Roy French if the gun he was trying to purchase was for anyone else? Did he mention the gun was for Darren Nichols himself? If the gun was indeed for Darren Nichols himself, then this would have put a different view on the murders and Darren Nichols' involvement on that night. The defence could have put a different light on this case to the jury, and it may have swayed the way they chose their verdict. I mean, after all, with the prosecution and defence's cases, it's down to who can tell the best story to the jury members. Right, what I'm going to do is leave this video here so you can have a think about what I've covered, as I've spoken about a lot of key individuals in this video. I'm just going to go through a few people I've mentioned in this video. God, there's quite a lot. Nipper Ellis, Pat Tate, Ian Spindler, Darren Nichols, Mick Steele, Jack Woons, Sarah Saunders, Colin Bridge, Dave Trunley, DC Bird, and Roy French. Gee, I think that's everyone. Right, yeah, I'm going to wrap it up now. So, as always, a big thank you to the YouTube subscribers. When I begin doing the research for these videos, I always think what I can produce for the YouTube subscribers. After all, this is where the videos first start off, before they get posted onto the Facebook group. So if you want to see these videos here first, click the subscribe button. And don't forget, you can join the Facebook group called The Real Essex Boys Murder Club, which is in capital letters. We have over 26,000 members now, and it keeps growing on a daily basis. We have new posts going on a daily basis also. All I ask is respect other people's opinions on there, as we all have our own theories of what we think happened that night. Last of all, a big thank you to all the admins who do a fantastic job of keeping the group ticking over. It's much appreciated. So until next time, take care.